Okay, so now that we've been through all the videos on how to actually create the three financial statements for Apple and how to project them 5 years into the future, and we've been through how deferred tax assets and liabilities work in the context of this model, I want to go into the next topic, which is what to do when you have problems with creating this type of model. So in other words, when your balance sheet does not balance, which is by far the most common problem, what do you do? How do you figure out what exactly is wrong? And then how do you actually go about fixing it without spending hours poring over your model looking at every single cell. So our approach here will be to go through a few different examples of different things that could be going wrong with your model. And in the order of difficulty here, we're going to start with the easiest possible problem, or one of the easier problems that you could run into that's easy to solve, easy to spot and fix, and then we'll get progressively more advanced and more complex. So this first problem that we're going to look at is the easiest and will take the least amount of time to fix should it happen to you when you're creating a model like this. Now, the step-by-step process I like to use when diagnosing problems like this and then actually fixing them is as follows. The first thing we always want to do when tracking down what's gone wrong with our model here is to look at the numerical difference on our balance sheet. So if we look at this balance check down here, we see that in this case, two things. We see that our balance is off by a constant number here going all the way across. When the balance is off by a constant number like this, it's usually an indication that it's something that's very, very simple in your model that's off. Because if it's a constant number, it's probably something that you've forgotten to add in year one or forgotten to subtract in year one, something of that nature. When it's a variable change from year to year, it gets more difficult to track down because that means that oftentimes a percentage is wrong somewhere, or you're forgetting to add something, or you're double counting something. But usually when it's a constant change, it's simply an oversight, and it's relatively simple to track down versus other things that could be going wrong. So in this case, if we look at this 2554 number, one thing I always like to do when there's a constant difference like this on the balance sheet is to actually look at every single item starting in year one, because the difference is constant here, and see what actually matches up to this. So it looks like nothing on shareholders' equity matches up to the 2554 number here. Going up, it looks like nothing on liabilities matches up. This deferred revenue item here is very close. So this stands out, but it doesn't match our number exactly. So we're going to keep looking and then come back to this later if it turns out that nothing else is going wrong here. So under long-term assets, nothing in the last four match, but if we look right here, long-term securities, 2554, it's the same going all the way across. So there's a 99% chance that something is going wrong with this number right here. There's nothing else on current assets that matches up to the number here at the bottom. So my guess would be that something is off with this number. Either we're not figuring it into our cash flow statement somehow, or we're not correctly summing it here. Before we start looking at the cash flow statement, it's always easiest to check for simple problems, simple things that have gone wrong here. So what I'm going to do is just press F2 on each of these different sums and check to make sure that everything's working correctly. So it looks like the total current assets here are all being summed correctly. So I'm going to go to total assets. A common mistake here is to forget to sum current assets or to forget to sum something else. If I press F2, here we see exactly what our problem is. We've forgotten to sum the first line here. So what I'm going to do is go in and fix this right now. It looks like this is the only problem. If we had something else going wrong, the number would be off by more than the 2554 here. So I'm going to change this to go from I-78 to I-82. Copy this across. You can also just press F2 quickly to check some of our other formulas here below. And it looks like the rest of these are working correctly, and we see that now our balance sheet balances. So that was a very, very simple scenario we just went over with the 2554 being off and us having the sum formula wrong. And that may seem trivial to you, but the reason I want to go over it is because it actually happens a fair amount in models, because a lot of times what happens is when you're going in and changing things on the balance sheet, you'll add in a new line right above this. The problem is that if you're going in and adding new lines at the bottom or top of areas like this, sometimes you forget to change around the sum formula, and if you add something at the top or bottom, the sum formula is not going to automatically change. So that actually happens quite a bit. The better idea, what you should be doing in cases like this, is if you want to add something, I would add it in the middle right here. So then if you have item X, let's say, well, then the sum formula automatically keeps working and you take into account the item that you've added in the middle of your balance sheet right here. So that's just something to be aware of when you're going through and modifying and working with balance sheets. But that's an example of a very simple problem that could be going wrong. When you're trying to fix your balance sheet and track down problems, you always want to start with the simplest possible thing first and then get more complex. So always check sum formulas, always look for very simple problems, especially if it's a constant difference, a constant amount that your balance sheet is off by. Coming up in the next videos, we're going to be getting into some more complex problems and looking at issues like double counting, not factoring in items correctly, forgetting to add and subtract various changes. So we'll be getting to more complex changes, and I'll show you some techniques for tracking those down without spending hours pouring through every single cell of your model.